Maybe now is the time. So I welcome everybody to the Cross-Vesry Journal Club for this month, April 2025. This afternoon we have Ali Mashayek, who is an associate professor in earth sciences here at the University of Cambridge, and he's made life easy for me by saying he'd rather introduce himself. So take it away, Ali.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thanks for the invitation. And so, as Chris said, I'm in the Department of Earth Sciences, and my background is in fluid dynamics and physical oceanography, and increasingly in our group, we're working on problems that involve other components of the climate system, from ocean ice interactions and also marine biochemistry and ecosystems. But today I'll be talking about the ocean meridional circulation and what I'll refer to as the bipolar seesaw that some of you might have heard of. I just realized the title I gave you is different from the title here, but I assure you they mean the same thing. And it's about the inertia in the system when you think about the ocean circulation. And so sort of this graphic, this video is a product of NASA that is based on assimilation of a wide range of data into an ocean model, in which case this is the MIT General Circulation Model. And I'll use this as we move forward, but by the end of the talk, I'll try to make the point that a combination of sort of classic data assimilation, which in modern day we would use more modern AI-based language, and also a combination of classic oceanographic classification of water masses and machine learning methods. We're trying to pull them all together to be able to look at the changes to masses of water that go from one pole to another. And that is linked to our ability to look at the tipping points and abrupt climate changes insofar as the ocean circulation is concerned. So that's where I'm getting to. But why we care about the ocean circulation, some very basics. If you think about the energy balance of the ocean, there's in and out, and in an equilibrium in and out balance, we are not in equilibrium. There's an excess heat because of greenhouse gases. And we know that most of that is in the ocean. And then if you think about the meridional heat transport, the equator to pole transport of heat, ocean plays a big role in that. Atmosphere does most of it, but ocean does a significant part. And if you break that into different basins with great spatial variations, and that obviously matters for the distribution of heat on the planet, which matters for many reasons. But if you put the two together, it's the meridional transport of heat, but also the extent to which you get that heat and store it in the deep ocean, which would basically be the turbulent mix in the ocean. If you put the two together, that's how you can get anthropogenic signals and store it in the deep ocean. So the timescales of that and also the ventilation of that back to the atmosphere is really key to understanding the timescales of how the system is going to respond over the next decades to centuries to anthropogenic climate change. And one of the other reasons we care about is the air-sea exchange of carbon, is how you can get the carbon into the ocean. And once in the ocean, there's carbonate chemistry, and then there's biology. And you have the primary productivity, the upper ocean, and it goes down the food chain, and you have the biological pump. And all of that is happening on an underlying, is happening on a background circulation, which redistributes the nutrients and carbon and so forth. So these are sort of very basic reasons, the heat budget, the carbon budget that we care about, the ocean circulation. But the key point that I'll try to get to is that to be able to actually quantify any of these budgets, you really need to be able to track water masses, where they come from, how they're transformed, where they end up, and how that's changing with the system. So a good chunk of the talk, I'll be focusing on these water masses, how we define them, what they mean, and how we can infer them from data using some machine learning. So to get there, the video that I showed, if you were to sort of simplify it, you get an ocean circulation schematic like the one below. If we go around it, if you start in the North Atlantic, where you get sea ice formation and brine rejection, you get salty cold water, which is heavy, and it sinks to the deep oceans. And then the water in the deep abyssal ocean finds its way into the Southern Ocean, where the wind can pull waters up through a process called Ekman transport. And then Southern Ocean is the only place that's open, so water masses can exchange between different basins. So that water ends up in different basins. And in all three major basins, turbulent mixing helped bring some of that water up to mid depths. And at that point, wind can actually feel that and pull it further to the surface. And if you follow the arrows and go through the Indonesian through flow around Africa, all the way to North Atlantic to close the circulation, you're thinking about, the 5-10,000 year time scale. So that's the inertia in the system. So if you think about the collapse of the circulation, if that were to happen, or whatever that means, if you think about Atlantic circulation tipping points, there's a very long memory in the system. So I'll very soon start talking about the fact that there's an asymmetric response between the two poles. And there is a question mark which the climate change community is now very much interested in, which is, are we heating up the system in such a way that the two poles are not out of phase, but everything is warming at the same time? And that, if you're doing modeling, might give you an indication that, oh, both branches of circulation might be collapsing. And a point I'll try to make is that that doesn't necessarily make sense from a mass conservation perspective, in that there's this inertia in the system and the whole thing is sort of still turning. So the real question is that as you change the polar regions, how is the system going to adjust, and what are those adjustments? And for example, if you think about the North Atlantic dynamics, that has significant implications for, let's say, the weather system in the UK and Europe and different regions of the world. You can care about different changes to the circulation for different reasons. Before I move on, I just want to point out that the ocean is density is stratified, that the deeper water are denser. But all of the deep ocean is filled with waters that are formed at few places at higher latitudes. So you have in the North Atlantic, and then also a couple of places around Antarctica. And I think that's a very key point, that the entire deep ocean is filled with water from few locations, formed at few locations in the polar regions. And that's why the overturning circulation and the climate is hypersensitive to changes to polar oceans. They have a disproportionate impact on the system through changing the global overturning circulation from an oceanographic perspective. So this is the same picture, which was already very simplified. If you were to zonally integrate that in your mind, you get what we usually refer to as a double cell circulation. So this is the upper branch of circulation. These are waters that form the North Atlantic, and this is the abyssal branch of circulation. And we are, oceanographically, we're very used to looking at as this representation, but it's important to remember that this is basically a whole thing collapse. In reality, these cells don't close on themselves in one basin. They're very much interconnected, and the whole thing is one big continuous loop. Now this here color is oxygen. So when you see purple, these are waters that have been in touch with the atmosphere more recently. And whenever you see yellow, it means that these are older waters and they've lost their oxygen content because of biological activity in the ocean, which consumes oxygen through photosynthesis. So coming to the bipolar seesaw, that's a concept that's been around for a long time, especially in the paleoceanographic community. This is from a nice paper by this group out of Norway. And the schematic basically describes the series of events that can lead to perturbation in one polar region propagating through the system to another one. But you could, if you just were to start one anywhere here and go around, you can imagine if the Arctic Ocean gets really warm, you lose the seasonality of sea ice, you lose the brine rejection, that compromises the formation of abyssal or the deep waters in the North Atlantic, and that can weaken the circulation of the ocean, the upper ocean. But that also impacts the Southern Ocean, the deeper branch of circulation, in a way that leads to cooling of Antarctica. And But when you slow down the circulation, let's say upper branch of circulation, over time, that slowdown also means that you get less heat from the equator to the polar regions to the Arctic, and so you start forming sea ice again. So there are time scales of adjustments, and if you think about it through the lens of dynamical systems, you can think of the upper branch of circulation on time scales decades to centuries, and the deeper branch on millennial time scales. So one can construct a two timescale slow and rapid manifold framework to represent the upper and deeper branch of circulations. And in that, you get the asymmetric bipolar seesaw, where when the Arctic is warming, Antarctica is cooling, and when that starts warming, the other one starts cooling. And it just goes back and forth. And if you look at the records, these are temperature records. This is from the blue here is from North Greenland ice core. And the one right below is from the Vostok ice core. So these are from ice core temperatures. And if you look, I mean, you could go around, but in this particular paper, they focus on this region, and they show that you have this asymmetric response. And this is an example of that sensitivity of system. They plot the temperature between these two on a phase plot, and you see that there are different loops. So these are different modes that the circulation wants to operate. One is, let's say, when the North Atlantic is cold and Antarctica is warm, and the other one is the other way. And then there's transition between the two. In this paper, they can replicate that in a coupled model. This is this NCAR CC SM4. I think this is the last version before the CSM models were rolled out. And there's a lot of adjustment made to this model to represent glacial interglacial dynamics. But nevertheless, they can replicate similar loops. And what they find, which is the focus of the paper, is that very slight changes in the atmospheric CO2 can let the model flip from one to another. But the key reason I'm showing this is to make the point that to describe the phenomenology, they really need to think about water masses, the sources of the waters, and track the phenomenology. And a lot of processes that are involved in terms of formation of deep waters, formation of shelf waters, the adjustment of those water masses when they come together in the Arctic Ocean or Southern Ocean, or the mixing of them in between in the ocean basins, all of those are really key to the sensitivity of the model outputs to produce these different modes of operation or tipping behavior. And most of those are processes that either we don't understand, or we don't have properly parameterized in models, or that we don't necessarily think about them as being leading order importance when it comes to climate bifurcations and tipping points. An example of the seesaw, this the figures on the left are from a paper by the MIT group that came out. This should be now, yep, or just over a decade ago. And back then, this was from observation surface temperature trends. And they were showing that there has been an asymmetric response in that the northern latitudes has been warming more rapidly than Antarctica. Now, we have more recent observations. If you look at the plot on the top right, and we know that in recent times, Antarctica has also been warming. So a key question, as I said before, is while there was evidence of this asymmetric response in that even though the net global temperatures was rising and the high latitudes were warming up in a net sense, in an average sense, the Antarctica was cooling, there's evidence that is actually changing quite rapidly in recent times. And there's observation, there's also modeling evidence for that. So the upper branch of circulation slow down for different scenarios. That's very well established in AR6 and even AR5 and so forth. This has been known for a long time, and also from a paleoclimate perspective, changes to the polar oceans, to the Arctic, and slowdown of the circulation is something that's sort of relatively well understood. What is new is model-based evidence that the lower branch of circulation might also be slowing down or shrinking. And this is from model, and what a key question that we had was that if we could actually see evidence of this in observations. And that's what I'm going to get to for the next 15 minutes or so. But the key point is that to be able to answer that question, how these are happening in models, are they real? one really needs to look at the phenomenology. And for that, one need to be able to track water masses. And that is challenging because if you think about the density of water, it doesn't change much. And so very slight changes to density of water, which can be attributed to changes to temperature and salinity, have enormous dynamical implications. So one thing we needed to do to look at the polar changes and then the whole AMOC or MOC changes, MOC being meridional overturning circulation of the ocean, was to classify water masses. So I'm going to very briefly introduce a classic way that oceanographers do that and show how we can sort of, boost that, turbo boost that using some basic machine learning and use that to classify water masses in the different basins and look at the trends and also even go to finer resolution and look at it at very fine scales where ocean interacts with, let's say, ice shelves in Antarctica and look at the phenomenology of warming of Antarctic ice shelves. So most of what I'm going to present over the next 15 minutes is work that's been led with a PhD student here in Earth Sciences, Josh Lanham, and Josh has been working with Sarah Perky at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, also Matthew Maslow at Scripps, Alberto Navarro Garaboto at the University of Southampton, and Martin Siegert at University of Exeter. And more recently, some part of the work that Josh has been doing, especially in the top right, is work that is also being doing with Laura Cimoli, who is an ICCS fellow. So OMP analysis. OMP stands for optimum multi-parameter analysis, and it's I think a pretentious oceanographic term for something very simple. So you have waters moving around, and you want to classify the waters, and oceanographers, I would say, have perhaps I shouldn't say it, but I think they have an unhealthy obsession with classifying water masses. But and that's important because sometimes waters can be marked in a meaningful way. You can have water entering the Arctic Ocean from the Pacific, and you call it Pacific water, right? And you can have water from Atlantic going to the Arctic. It's warm, it has heat content, it's salty, it's under sea ice, it's Atlantic waters. So sometimes it's easy to distinguish, but a lot of times you're in the middle of a big ocean, and based on very small changes in temperature salinity, you can define water masses. And then you can actually get really hung up on details of how they mix and where they come from. And things can get complicated. And the times you have to step back and remind yourself that I'm just talking about waters, and the density changes to these are very, very slight. So at times, the definitions of water masses become subjective, and at times it's more objective, especially when it's sort of set geometrically. Now, all of this is important because, again, to remember that the pole-to-pole scale of the system is 10,000 kilometers, and the depth of the system of the ocean is 4 kilometers, right? So we're basically thinking about something very thin, more or less the same density of water, but the very slight changes lead to sinking of water and turbulence, bringing it up, and all the overturning. So we're talking about very slight changes that have very important implications for the carbon cycle and heat and so forth. So that is the challenge. How can you flesh out those small differences in a way that can let you do budgets? So you know if Arctic is warming up, how much of that heat is getting to Antarctica, how much of that heat is sort of getting to the ice shelves. So oceanographically, that's why regionally or rarely, but occasionally globally, we try to define water masses. And the way we do it is that we say that imagine you're somewhere in the ocean. Let's say you're in the Arctic Ocean. You know, some of the water comes from Pacific Ocean, some of the waters in the Arctic come from Atlantic, and some of it comes, let's say, from shelf. They're from on the shelves and sinks to the deep ocean. You can have more than one, but let's imagine more than a few. But imagine you have 3 or 4 water masses. Sources, and we call them end members. And you can say that I'm going to get any parcel of water and assume that that's composed of water coming from these 3, 4, or n sources. And I can write the composition of that as a linear sum of those. And then you can do it for many parcels, and you have a system, and you can solve it. Now, if you have the same number of end members or source waters as as the tracer that you use. It can be temperature, salinity, oxygen, nutrients, nitrates, phosphates, silicate, the tracers that we usually use. If you have the same number of tracers as end members or source waters, you have a closed system. And if you don't, then you don't, and then you have to do tricks and deal with it in other ways. But this is done commonly in oceanography. So the idea is simple and the implementation is simple. You usually don't have the right number of things lining up. That's the complexion. But what this really actually depend on is the identification of the source waters. And that is really something that comes from observationalists that do field work and have a good feel for where these come from. So I will show you outputs of water mass classifications, but it's important to remember that to get there, there's a lot of tuning, and that involves going to people that have been to see and look at the data, and they tell us, oh no, that can't be. I've been there, there's shelf water coming. You have to tune your source waters or end members to actually match the reality more. Now, I'm saying that to make the point that it is entirely possible to objectively, using machine learning, do a classification of water masses, right? And objectively classify them into different classes and see if it lines up against reality. An example of that is a project that it was a master's project by a student called Peizong that Emma Bolland at British Antarctic Survey supervised. They looked at the ice tethered profiler data in the Arctic Ocean. They did the classification. Objectively, the student didn't know oceanography, and they landed on 5 or 6 classes that then, if you looked at it in temperature salinity space, lined up very well with the observationalist classification of water masses. So we haven't done it, and I'm not going to talk about it, but it's entirely possible to develop a machine learning objective classification of water masses. And that's important because when we do it the way it's classically done, it's very much tuned to the data in the real world, whereas your models, climate models, they cannot very accurately track, they cannot accurately replicate the temperature salinity distributions in the ocean. So if you come up with a classifier based on the observational data applied to model, you're going to get the wrong classifications at times. But that doesn't mean that models are wrong in the sense that they still have waters coming from Atlantic to the Pacific to the Arctic, and they get you similar dynamics. So an objective classification, if a framework like that is designed, that can help create better systematic agreement between the models and observations. That's the point that I'm going to come back to later. But what we do here is something simpler. So to give you an example, what Josh did is that we use some data from a paper that came out of Guillaumard, and they used data from various transects in the Atlantic Ocean. So these are ship-based transects. Actually, you can see them here in this plot. So something like that. I'm going to come back to this plot in a second. But they used a lot of transect ship-based data, and then they said that, oh, we know that we have waters that form Antarctica. We call them Antarctic bottom waters. We have waters formed in the North Atlantic and sink. We call them North Atlantic deep waters. They can have upper and lower. We have shelf water, circumpolar deep water. They define them, and they used temperature, salinity, nitrates, phosphate, oxygen, silicate to do the OMP or classification problem. And they published that and published the data. So we simply got the data that now has the tracer data and the classified water masses as tags. And these are not black and white. For each water parcel and for each water mass that it could be composed of, you get a coefficient which goes from 0 to 1. So you can see how they composed. You can see the composition in a continuous way. So we use the output of this and of OMP. Sorry, there was no silicate. This is temperature, salinity, dissolved oxygen, nitrate, phosphate, and alkalinity. And this is the transects along which the data was taken. And we used we used some tree-based methodologies, and initially we also tried some neural networks that it worked, but tree-based works better for various reasons. But what we found was that we could train machine learning models on the outputs of water mass classification such that then only based on temperature and salinity, primarily, you can classify a water mass. And the significance of that is that we have a lot more observational data from Argo flows to ship base to many other sources that's only temperature and salinity. We have much more, like, if I'm not wrong, 2 orders of magnitude less data that has multiple tracers. So just the fact that you can train on a much smaller subset of data and then extend the reach of the classification to a much larger data set is significant in oceanographic terms. So what you see in the top right here, this is work done in collaboration with Kaushik Srinivasan. Sorry, I think I forgot to list his name. He's a research scientist at UCLA. So he helped with this analysis. And what he's done here is that every box that you see has a number, and that number means the skill of the machine predict the water masses within that box when the data from that box wasn't used in the training. So basically out of distribution training. And basically it shows that it works relatively well. And the bottom right is the basically showing that basically the agreement, basically showing that the prediction versus observations, that the model does a good job. So now what's the value of that? The value of that is that once you have that, you can apply it to either global data sets or you could apply it to models. So here we are applying the machine learning model to ECHO, and ECHO, some of you or all of you might know, is a NASA product, is MIT GCM, data assimilation, you have remote sensing, altimetry, SSTs, and etc. You have all the hydrographic sections, Argo flows, and a bunch of other things. So it's the closest. It's not a reanalysis product, it's a state estimate. So it's loyal to the equations and closest to observations. And you try to minimize the cost function. And we apply the methodology, the classifier boosted machine learning, and you can actually start getting three-dimensional distributions of water masses. And that's really key because then this is a model that conserves mass, and you have your water masses. You can start doing budgets of how much of waters from Arctic or Antarctic or in between heating up or expanding or shrinking. To give you an example of that, if you look over the past couple of decades, you can see that the circumpolar deep waters, these are waters that are a combination of Antarctic bottom waters at the base of the ocean and North Atlantic deep waters that form in the Atlantic going south. They mix and form circumpolar deep waters. So these are waters that are warm. They have the anthropogenic heat signal, and they're surrounding Antarctica. And shelf waters that form around Antarctica and Antarctic bottom waters, they sort of protect the Antarctic margins, if you like, from the warmth approaching. And this shows the trends over the past couple of decades that the warm waters are expanding in terms of their thickness, and that's coming at the cost of Antarctic bottom waters. So that's basically an evidence based on this model, which has assimilated data, that there is an actual decline in the branch of circulation that is originated around Antarctica. So this is basically one evidence that the Lee et al. Nature paper, which some of you might know, made quite a big buzz a couple of years ago as a first serious indication that the Antarctic branch of deep circulation might also be collapsing. This is first evidence that there is something to that. There is an actual trend there. But this is still not directly observations, but this is hybrid. There's a lot of data assimilated in a dynamical model, which is the MIT GCM, and then there is a separate oceanographic classification and machine learning, so we can actually extend that to 3D and apply it to this model. Now, digging a bit deeper in the recent changes in Antarctica. So this is from Lee et al. And the color is the age anomaly. So here, this basically points out to the fact that this bit here basically indicates that the lower branch of circulation in their model is slowing down. This is a forecast to 2050. So the circulation is slowing down, so the waters are older because it's slowing down. And this bit here shows that there is a poleward shift of the CDW. That's basically what I showed before, which is sort of the warmer water is getting closer to Antarctica. So the bottom water formation and this branch of circulation is slowing down, and the warmer waters are sort of closing in. Now, again, going back to the bipolar seesaw, in a bipolar seesaw, this wouldn't necessarily happen at the same time as the Arctic is warming up, right? So this is an indication that these two are happening at the same time. From a dynamical systems perspective, that means that the loops that we had, that the system could go back and forth between different modes, we might be entering a new phase where it is unlike any of those two. It's a new regime. So digging a bit deeper, this is work that Josh and Sarah Perkey led. This is sections, ship-based measurements from sort of GLODAP data set around Antarctica. The color is the fraction of the circumpolar deep water, the warm waters that have the heat signal. And when I talk about N members, this is the waters from these sections, the water samples. These are sort of bottled data plotted on a temperature and salinity diagram. And this is the distribution of water masses, right? And you can think about, so there's an N member here, probably an N member. There are certain things that actually look like N members, but there are certain water masses, like if you look at CDW here, there's certain ones that are sort of in the middle. It's not clear to pick N members. And so that's what I mean, that the oceanographic knowledge is really required for people to be able to say that, to help you identify your sources. So this is subjective, this is empirical, this is knowledge based. And my point was that one, in principle, should be able to automate this using more objective machine learning methods. Now, but this is done, and then as I said before, you can use the machine learning to extend it to only when you have temperature and salinity. Just based on, this is the GLODAP data, which has the multiple tracers, like nitrate, phosphate, alkalinity, and dissolved oxygen. And along the sections, different latitudes, different longitudes, you can see the different water masses classified. This is the warm circumpolar deep water and also the North Atlantic deep water. North Atlantic is a sink of anthropogenic heat. So this is really warm waters. Approaching Antarctica, you have the Antarctic bottom water formation and you have shelf water. This is the dense shelf water. So competition between these two is really key to how much heat gets to actually Antarctic ice shelves. So now this is done based on GLODAP data. Then we use machine learning to learn how to classify water masses around Antarctica based on the output of this, but use machine learning to learn how to predict it only based on temperature and salinity. And when you do that, you can then extend the reach of the analysis significantly. For example, that's the GLODAP sort of data that I showed on which we train. Now you can go to Argo flows that sample the top 2 kilometers of the ocean. You can build a climatology based on the Argo flows that measure temperature and salinity. And there's a product by here, Romish and Gilson at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, which is the Argo climatology. And then you can apply your predictor, which only works based on temperature and salinity, to look at the water masses within the Argo product. And here you can, here in this column, you can see the GLODAP climatology and classification of water masses. And here you can see the Argo. And the agreement is very well. And also you can see it, look at it as a section. So this is further sort of sign that we can indeed expand the reach and do classify water masses when we don't have direct observations. And that's really valuable because then you can link it to models, to verify models or constrain them, or you can also do proper budgets because you have the whole three-dimensional field. Now, example of doing that based on the Argo, this is the circumpolar, these are anomalies. This is circumpolar deep water. This is Antarctic bottom water. Let's just focus on the top row. And this is, like I said, the trends and anomalies. So red means the circumpolar deep water is expanding around Antarctica, and blue means that it is shrinking. And if you get the signal, let's say for the circumpolar deep water, and do a principal component analysis, you see that the first mode is indeed the expansion of CDW, and then there, if you look at the second, third components and so forth, you can find modes of Southern Ocean variability from Pacific decadal oscillation to Southern annual mode. You can find those in these, but the main signal, most of the variance is indeed a climate change trend, which is the warming of the waters approaching Antarctica. And this is a purely observational evidence of that happening over the past few decades. So this, I think, is significant. And then you can even dig deeper. One thing we did with Matt Maslow at Scripps Institution of Oceanography, we got SOSI, which is some product similar to ECHO, MIT GCM based, but it's only for the Southern Ocean. Southern Ocean state estimate, and it again assimilates a wide range of data. We got SOSI, and then we went to much higher resolution. So it's the entire Southern Hemisphere. It is 24th of a degree. It has 240 vertical levels. It has hourly winds. It has tides. It has Eric Rigneau's. Eric Rigneau is at UC Irvine, a glaciologist. He has reconstructions of ice shelves. So we have that built in. And so there's a lot more physics in SOSI, in SOHI, the high resolution model. But again, this is SOSI, which is a data estimation going to high resolution and resolve. So it's constrained by model. But because we go to higher resolutions and we put in the ice shelves, we end up with ice cavities and regions where the parent model, which was SOSI or ECHO, didn't have any data. And then we resolve dynamics in those. And so what Josh did was that he went to the database of seals, MEOP. Josh is here, he corrected me. And we looked at, well, he used the seal data. There's quite a bit of seal data in these ice shelves. And it verified that the model produces the right temperature salinity distributions in most of these. So that was key to verification of what I'm about to show you. But when you do that now at this resolution, then you can actually start looking at the phenomenology very well. So Josh classified different regimes around Antarctica that can contribute to the upwelling of warm circumpolar deep waters to the base of the ice shelves. And that's obviously important for the stability of the ice shelves. And so like one of the regimes that I'm showing here is basically wind dominated. And here in this region, the winds are eastward, the winds are westward, so easterly winds. And as a result, they push waters down. And when you go into the summer, that the wind slows down and that pushing down stops. And so the deeper waters, circumpolar deep waters that are warm can actually come further close into the cavity. And you can see that the intrusion here. And this top part is ice. And then when the wind picks up, like here and here, then it pushes down the warm water. So in certain regions, it is the seasonality of the wind that controls the heat supply to the ice cavity. And in certain regions, it can be more complicated. This is the Amundsen Sea, and there's an undercurrent from circumpolar deep water that there's a westerly wind anomaly that helps upwelling of circumpolar deep waters. And then there's the shelf water, and the two of them form an undercurrent. That undercurrent interacting with bottom topography sort of dominates the transport of heat to the ice sheet. So it's more complicated. And there can be other regimes. This is buoyancy-driven regime in the Adelie coast. This is where you have seasonal ice shelf water formation. And when it forms, it's really dense. So it protects the ice sheet from the circumpolar deep waters that are warmer. And then when that's not the case, then this can actually go up and provide heat to the ice sheets. And then you have also other regimes where you have topography, and this is where you have canyons, and you can form shelf waters, and you can have the circumpolar deep waters. They can come together. Topography can play a role. You get a geostrophic adjustment, and through that, basically, you get some level of mixing where you can get the heat through that, more heat supply to the ice shelves than that you normally would. Now, again, I'm showing you different water masses. The way we could do it is, like I said before, in terms of the OMP and the machine learning and so forth. So point being to get, if you look at the left panel here as a summary, the top left is the circumpolar deep water. You can think of it as a source of heat to Antarctica. And here it is the dense shelf water. And the two of them compete. And you can see where you have more dense shelf water, the circumpolar deep water intrusion is less, and vice versa. And the way that the two compete involves the seasonality of the winds, the bathymetry, the undercurrents, and you should be able to sort of track the water masses around. Now, when we think about ice sheets, we think about the grounding line and the types of ice sheet instabilities, and then we have the west versus east Antarctic sort of instabilities. But in Antarctica, unlike Greenland, still the main source of heat is basically oceanographic, right? So basically mapping out these regimes is really important to know where the trends are going to have what impact moving forward. I think I already said that. Now, one thing that I won't take deep in, but is that we could actually extend this and start looking at chemistry. We added to the same story, and this is also work that involves Laura Cimoli at ICCS. We started looking at the nutrient fluxes at the surface of the Southern Ocean and air sea fluxes of carbon. And one thing that we learned when we look at these water masses is that the turbulent mixing between them is really key. We tend to think about turbulent mixing as what drives the circulation, and that can equilibrate on timescales of decadal to centennial or even larger. But when you think about mixing of tracers, such as nutrients, let's say mixing of iron in the Southern Ocean, which is very iron limited, just a little bit of mixing can go a long way. So we very quickly learned that if we just modify the background mixing, the number that we don't usually care about because it's very small, 10 to the minus 5 meters squared per second in the upper ocean, again, this is very small. Like when you have storms going over, you get 2 to 3 orders of magnitude more mixing at the top. If we just modify the background value of mixing between these water masses very slightly, we can change the air sea carbon fluxes in an integrated sense over the Southern Ocean by anywhere from 16 to more than 100% over a 1 year to 6 year time scale. Right. So the model is really significantly sensitive to turbulent mixing. And that is a problem because turbulent mixing is a notoriously difficult problem in terms of understanding. Is very fine subgrid scale, intermittent parametrization is very difficult. And so that led us to start worrying about how do we actually parameterize mixing of water masses using machine learning. So I'm going to come back to the mixing problem in a second to finish the talk, but I just want to, before that, point out that what I described about the work that Josh has been doing with others in relation to Arctic, we are sort of doing something very similar in the Arctic. Sorry, what Josh has been doing in Antarctica, we've been sort of doing something similar in the Arctic Ocean. This is work that's led by Kate Oglethorpe, who's a PhD student in the group, also with Josh and a number of other collaborators. And actually Emma Boland from BAS is involved with that, and Colin Caulfield from ICCS is involved with that. Colin is Kate's co-supervisor. So we are looking at distribution of data, actual data from ice tethered profilers, Argo profiles, ship-based, and so forth. And we've basically repeated the same thing in terms of training on temperature, salinity, and dissolved oxygen data, and then using machine learning to extend it to where we only have temperature. For example, the ice tethered profilers under the ice, they mostly measure temperature and salinity, right? So we don't have many tracers to work with, and it's much more data limited, but we have just enough oxygen data to constrain the solution to define the water masses that then we can apply to larger data set when we have temperature salinity. And that gives us distribution of water masses under the sea ice. So we can begin doing budgets of heat and see how the Atlantic warm water is mixing through the freshwater lens that protects the sea ice and so forth. So some preliminary results is that, like, if you think about the region where you have the Beaufort Gyre, there is, over the past decades, there is an increase in the portion of that water that is coming from the Pacific Ocean. And if you look at the Nordic seas, you actually see a very clear trend of Atlantic water intrusion to the Arctic, which is the Atlantification. So, so again, this is based on data, and then we did the classification of water masses, and now we can go to state estimates. In this case, we're applying it to Arctic Ocean state estimate. This is, based coming out of group at UT Austin, Patrick Heimbach and Yoon and Helen Pillar. And again, we very similar to the Southern Ocean, we can map the water masses and try to understand the phenomenology of these trends. And finally, I mean, I'm not necessarily giving you a scientific result, but just basically run you through different steps that we are taking to understand the trends and changes to water masses in and around Antarctica and the Arctic over the past few decades. And Lara has actually worked quite a bit on the exchange of them across the basin through the meridional circulation. And one of the last building blocks that we need to put in there to be able to look at the whole system over the past decades and the trends is the mixing between these water masses. And there's a lot of processes from, double diffusion and turbulent mixing in the Arctic to lee wave and tidal generation to eddies and submesoscales, all of which are, flow around seamounts. All of these are subgrid scale parameterizations. Most of them are not properly understood, uh, let alone having them together in a complex system, nonlinear interacting. So these are really key in terms of mixing of heat and carbon nutrients between the upper and the deep ocean and also across the basin. But the time scale of our knowledge progressing in terms of understanding them and parameterizing them, we started doing these going back to Lord Rayleigh in the 1800s. The time scale of that has been longer than basically our ability to, but basically all the Arctic sea ice has gone away more or less in the meantime. So because of that, we started looking at alternatives for mixing parameterizations, and this is some work that again we did some years ago that involves also column, and we went to let's not do that. So just in a nutshell, we got data from microstructure profilers that measure turbulent mixing throughout the water column. Each of them have a number of vertical profiles, 4,000 meters deep. The resolution of data is, you can think of it as a meter. And we figured that you could actually train a turbulent mixing parameterization based on this data that works better than the parameterizations, physics-based parameterizations that we have. And we used neural networks and decision trees. They worked equally well. It actually worked better than we thought. And in a nutshell, if you can tell a model how far you're from the generation boundaries, generation of energy and waves, top or bottom of the ocean, what your stratification is, what your temperature salinity distribution is, with that information to leading order, you can predict the patterns of mixing in the vertical well. And we tried it by doing out of distribution for a lot of these experiments. So this worked relatively well. Since then, we have improved this quite a bit, and we are now in the process of, we have extended it to the Arctic. We've shown that the Arctic mixing is distinctly different from Southern Ocean mixing, from the rest of the ocean, in that you can train one that works for the ocean, but not for the Arctic, one that can work for the Arctic, but not global. But we've managed to train a mixing parameterization that works for both. And now we are in the process of putting that in the Met-Office models through a program called Canary, Climate of the Arctic and North Atlantic. It's a UKRI-funded National Capability Center. So we are putting that, and we have hindcast and forecast runs through the Canary program, a number of ensemble members, and we're basically beginning to look at the variability of mixing. So that's where I'm going to stop. We've been working on the polar and the intermediate water masses and their mixing. So I'd be very keen, in addition to scientific chats, given that I'm giving this in the ICCS Journal Club, I'd be very keen on exploring any ways that we could work together on the implementation of the mixing parameterization that Colm and I and others have been developing. in models, and also the water mass classification thing that we've developed, we are applying it to models, and that is a tool that could also become a part of standard analysis where people can actually run it as a diagnostic to map the water masses. It's very nice because it gives you a number between 0 and 1 of any water class. And any budget you do, you can just multiply it by that fraction and get the net heat in a given water mass, or do any budget for a particular water mass. So I think I went over time a bit, but hope that this leaves a bit of time for questions.
We certainly do have time for questions, Ali. That was brilliant. Thank you very much.